Welcome to my latest webinar at the School of Natural Esoterics, where we're going to be discussing the nature of animistic communication, animistic consciousness. So this is a subject that's really close to my heart. I've been studying this for many years because for about 98% of human history, mankind lived in this animistic world and perceived and interacted with an animate world. So they recognized that spirit imbued all these different levels of consciousness, and that there were beings that lived within all aspects of nature. And it wasn't just a belief or a philosophy, it was actually a lived experience. And so this understanding, this way of being, was across the entire world. So it wasn't just restricted to one particular area, it was the whole world. Even if you look at kind of indigenous communities from different parts of the world, if you look at even Tibetan Buddhism, the Tantras, they're just full of all these deities. You look at the Druidism, it's just full of an animated world, beings in the rocks and the rivers and the streams, and our ancestors had relationships with them, living relationships with the spring, living relationships with the river and the trees. And so we live now in a world where these living forces have been reduced to metaphor and to just concepts. Modern philosophy modern psychology has reduced these living archetypal forces to just concepts and abstracts. And so we're living in this very detached way from the world, from the natural world. And even though we've had writers like Tolkien and Coleridge and Yeats and Keats, who have tried to keep this animistic consciousness alive, there are certain people in our world who are actively working to reawaken this within us, to help us reconnect to those lost parts of ourselves and to this aspect of being human. And one of these people is the extraordinary Saskia von Diest, who I am very honored to have in my life, and who has dedicated her life to helping people understand this interspecies communication. Hi, Saskia.
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for having me here. It's always such a pleasure to share any kind of platform with you.
Yeah. So Saskia is the founder of Ecofluency, and she is also an educator, facilitator, and consultant for nature communication. So Saskia, give everybody a little bit of a flavour about how you got into nature communication, because we are a bit on the fringe, aren't we?
Very much, very much. And I'm one of those people that acts a little bit as a bridge because like you, I come from a background where I wasn't doing this as a child. Many nature communicators around the world grew up and remembered being able to communicate with plants and animals and fairies and so on, and the pets and their grandmothers who'd passed away. But I didn't have that. And so I actually come from an academic background, and I think of myself more as a recovering academic than anything else. So I came from a PhD in plant pathology. So I was studying agricultural plant diseases. And in 2012, that was in my PhD, I heard about animal communication and attended a workshop with very well-known animal communicator Anna Breitenbach. And it was through that it changed my life. So in this workshop, I had this extraordinary experience of not just having the feeling of, wow, I can communicate with all of existence, which is partly what this topic is going to be about tonight. But also, I don't have to feel alone anymore. And this touches in beautifully to what you were saying of feeling like we're finding our place in the world. So it was this feeling of, wow, I never need to feel lonely in my life anymore. So after my PhD, turned down a job with a multinational agrochemical corporation. I was engaged at the time, and that fell apart because I became too weird, thankfully, and ended up doing 7 years of postdoctoral research in intuitive farming with Stellenbosch University in South Africa and Coventry University in the UK. And in these two postdoctoral research fellowships, I had the pleasure and the honor of meeting many farmers who communicate with nature on a daily basis sometimes, all in very different ways, and use that to inform their practical management decisions. And this was part of a wider research field for subtle agroecologies. And it was during that time that I also had developed my own capacity to not only communicate with animals, but then with plants and trees and nature spirits and ancestors. And I did training in family constellations as a facilitator. I also did training with Emma in the way of the warrior healer and psychic surgery, and then decided actually I no longer wanted to be in academia because it felt like I was hitting my head against a brick wall. And I became less interested in how nature communication works and more interested in that it works and that people should be, in my opinion, doing this more and more. So I founded Ecofluency in 2020 and officially in 2021. And through that, I offer, like Emma was describing, consultations, teaching. I do energetic clearings. But even though I've been doing nature communication for approximately 12 years, I feel still like very much a beginner. So I never call myself an expert in this field. And frankly, I don't think anybody can. And I also wouldn't say that I'm a healer, a shaman, or a therapist, because even though this work is shamanic and it can be therapeutic, at best, I think of myself as a facilitator and a translator for this work. And my main passion is providing opportunities for other people to find their own way of communing and communicating and connecting more deeply with the rest of nature in whichever form they feel interested in. And that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, great. So we've called this this talk "Communicating with the Visible and Invisible." Why do you feel you wanted to define those two?
Yeah, I think similar to what you were describing with an animist worldview, in an animist worldview, everything becomes everyone because everyone has then consciousness. So all of reality, in my definition of nature, is nature. All of existence, including the wooden table that my laptop is on right now. And there are many maps across all kinds of religions and spiritual traditions and mystery schools around the world. So there's no clear classification of what is visible and invisible, what is nature and what is not. But what I will say that we can use broad brushstrokes to define it. And when I say visible and invisible, I mean visible to the human eye, because we have this massive electromagnetic spectrum, and visible light that we can see is only a tiny sliver of that. So when I say visible, I'm talking about, of course, the plants and the animals, the insects, rocks, rivers, our bodies, stars. But we have the invisible realm as well, which is things that we would need, let's say, a microscope to see, or a telescope, microbes, atoms, ETs, things that are very far away, other galaxies, but also things that exist in other realms. So these are ancestors, nature spirits, elementals, angels, demonic beings, lower astrals, fairies, and they have many different names. These, I'm not a big fan of this terminology because it depends on the culture and the education, the spiritual leanings that we have, our psychosocial programming. So really, I'm just going to call it, broadly speaking, the ones in the other realms. But there are very many, and they're more than we can ever see and even know about. No matter what spiritual tradition we delve into, there's so much that we'll never know about. But what we can do is start to touch into what these other aspects of nature are that are less popular. And this becomes very interesting because there are many fantastic animal communicators in this world, as well as plant and tree communicators, fewer that delve into microbial communication. There are lots of people who delve into ancestral communication, whether it's with humans or more than humans, but fewer that will delve into, let's say, extraterrestrial communication in a safe way that respects our energetic safety, our psychic hygiene, our sovereignty. So I think that this is by no means a webinar or a chat between Emma and me that will cover the topic in a very thorough way. It's really just to tip our hat at it, to nod at it and start to open this conversation because it deserves being more inclusive in what we just define as nature and including what we define as visible and invisible nature.
Yeah, and even though, we live in this really reductionist and detached way from the world, that the invisible and the other world, it's never gone away. It's always there in our children's stories. It's always there in poetry. We always come back to it. You can't eradicate it. And so that's what I find so beautiful about this, is that we're just kind of reawakening something that's, just bringing it more to the surface, but it's always there. And like you said, children can naturally tap into those realms, but it's almost like our schooling system and our kind of culture just hammers it out of us as we get older. And we're told that it's just our imagination and it's just a dream, and there's so much more to life than that. We're being disconnected from this, something that's bigger than ourselves. We've forgotten our place in nature. And so what I see it has resulted in is a destruction of habitat, a destruction of a pollution of our world, but also mental health crises. That detachment and from our bodies, like you said, our bodies are made up of a multitude of beings. Our microbiome has consciousness. In Chinese medicine, all the organs have an individual consciousness that we can communicate with, and that our soul forces experience the world through. So, yeah, I mean, how do you define nature then? When you say you're communicating with nature, because you talk about talking to various levels, but where do you start with helping people to connect to nature in general?
To me, it starts with the worldview. And it starts not just with me telling you that this is possible and that it is your ancestral birthright and that it is something that you have a duty and a responsibility as well as a capacity for magic to do, but it's having your own experiential evidence. So for me, I say to people, well, if you're not comfortable with the idea and you just want a taste of what is possible, book a consultation. But if you're really keen on diving into the deep end, come to a workshop or a course. And if joining one with me doesn't work for you, then there's a whole list of other fantastic teachers that I list on the website that you could go to. But ultimately, for me, as is the case with so many other people who've not consciously done this for most of their life and have had to rekindle it in a way, it starts with bringing our awareness back to our physical senses, our subtle awareness, our feelings, emotions, our intuition, and expanding our sensory awareness so that we can start to practice this and break it down into the basic steps, because it's a science, it's an art and a magic. There's rigor, there's discipline to it, there's a creative aspect to it. There's so many ways of communicating with nature, as many ways as there are people in this world and more. Mine is just one particular way. It's not by all means the best or the only way, but it's one way. And so the basic steps start with treating it like a conversation, because like you were saying, it's about finding the right relationship. And if we acknowledge that we are in relationship with all other life and all of the other beings in existence, then it means that foundational to relationship is communication. And so it's making it easy for people to have their own experience of that conversation, that two-way dialogue. And the irony is that it's paradoxical. It's as much about unlearning what we already know as it is about learning new skills. So when I teach a 9-step set of guidelines, for example, in a beginner workshop, then I also encourage people to adapt those to what is needed for them, to make sure that this is not prescriptive. These are guidelines, and that it is possible with any aspect of nature because the same principles apply. So, and like I was mentioning about the language preferences, find something that works for you. Some people are put off of the idea of nature communication because they think, I don't want to talk about communicating with the spirit, for example. Cool, then find a different word for it. So for example, I talk about spirit of place when I'm doing landscape communication. So if that doesn't work for you, think of like a deva, which is a Sanskrit word, or the genius loci, which comes from the anthroposophical background, overarching intelligence, essence of place, overlighting angel, guardian. There's so many different terms. And we're still quite limited in our terminology to describe what is nature and how do we address these ones. But for me, it's more important that we start to expand that lexicon. And even if it's clumsy, start and keep trying, than be put off on the first try, even if you get nothing. And this is something that I want to make very clear, is that in my experience, it's less important that we get it right the first time, and more important that we keep doing it, because it's not just about us. This is as much about, because it's a two-way relationship, it's as important for the other being to see that you are reaching out. And sometimes it will be a very long time since they've had communication from a human. And so there'll be either the stuckness about them of like, they don't really know how to communicate with us, or they might feel a bit like neglected. So it's part of our healing in the relationship, this psychosocial, cultural healing that we're doing, this reparative work, is to keep going forward in a gentle way, but also be gentle with our nervous system and trust that if it doesn't happen the first time, it doesn't mean that it's not real. It just means maybe that there are other ways of going about it. Maybe it needs a slowing down or a different approach, or maybe it's just not the day or the time or the kind of being that you're communicating with that's appropriate. So it's a matter of keep going at it. It took me years to get to the point where I am now. Like I said, I didn't grow up being able to do this like that. It took me years to get to the level of accuracy. And even so, and this is something that I found throughout this field of practice with other colleagues and friends, is that still the accuracy of information is only going to be like 85 to 95% accurate, because it's still coming through our own filters, our own worldview, the language that it has to be reduced to when I convey the information through a message and translate it to a client, for example. So when I say try and start, you could buy Emma's book. You could start to work with plant essences. You could go to a workshop or a course. There are many different ways of starting, and I won't go into all the different ways in this because of the scope of this chat. But what I'd like to invite is find what your starting point is now and try. See what happens.
And that first time that you're seen by something in the spirit realm and they're communicating with you, it's just it just completely shifts your worldview. It completely it can make you cry, because it's like coming home. And so there's a real deep healing in that for us when we make that connection. But I can understand that people, are a bit apprehensive and a bit kind of, scared. There's a lot of trauma around connecting into the spirit realm, and rightly so. We're so close to the lower astrals and the astral realms. We're so intimately connected to them that we can quite easily kind of connect into places that we don't particularly want to or might not feel safe within. So how do you build in your work? How do you build in kind of checks and balances in to make sure that kind of safety is built in?
That's a good question, actually, because one of the biggest issues that people experience in my work is not having a message, not receiving information, but trusting the information that comes. So doubt is a big thing. Am I making this up? Or is that a real message? Or is it actually from that being? Or is it from the being that I have addressed? Is the being who I've addressed the one who is responding? And so the way that I bypass that is by focusing on energetic safety and psychic hygiene. I create a safe container, which has been patterned or programmed, let's say, to make it conducive for clarity. And that is something that I focus very much on. That's something that I encourage people to do always. And the reason that I teach this 9-step set of guidelines is so that people can go back to that, and that they, it's very, very basic. It's like a format that you can use, and it's applicable to any aspect of nature you want to use, regardless of whether it's animals or your ancestors, a tiny clod of compost in the ground or an entire constellation of stars. And so by creating a container that has these filters, and by working with those who look after you, your spirit team, your crew, your allies, whatever you want to call them, your guardians, and it doesn't matter if you don't know who those are, you can still call on them for your own safety and to make sure that they filter the information that comes through so that it is clear. And this is going to be especially important, let's say, for example, when you get further into this work and you want to be working with landscapes or ecosystems or even the entire human body, because you're working with something like a Russian doll effect, and you're working with so many different kinds of aspects of this ecosystem that when you're calling into council these beings so that you have this round table discussion with all the stakeholders at that meeting, then you're making sure that you're not inviting anybody in whose opinion you don't want or information you don't want to have included into that meeting. So for me, it's just creating a container. I treat any conversation with another aspect of nature as one that could be potentially very sensitive. So you wouldn't have a conversation like that on the fly, on a train in the middle of London, for example. Ideally, you'd want to create the room, the space that allows you to feel physically safe, allows you to feel mentally clear. It is meaning that you're not going to be distracted or disturbed in any way, especially when you're starting out. Because I still feel doubt 12 years into this experience of practicing nature communication on a daily basis. So to bypass that, I have to trust myself. It's another big thing, work aspect of this work. And I know, Emma, you will agree, is that if you trust yourself and you trust that what you are doing to the best of your ability is working, then it works. And trust that your spirit team has your back for the rest of it. If you're going to start doubting yourself, you start to create holes in the energy field that allow for issues to come into play. And I say all of this not to put people off, but to recognize that nature communication is risky. There are dangers involved, which is why many spiritual traditions and mystery schools and religions for eons have tried to put people off from doing this. But we are now, at least I believe, in an age where we need to become those healers, those spiritual leaders for ourselves. And it doesn't mean that spiritual leaders are now put to the side, but what it means is that we are equipping ourselves with those skills. So by doing that, that means that we need to take better responsibility of our energy field. And by doing that, it means that you can then have safer conversations with another aspect of nature and always treat every single one of those as one that's going to be potentially sensitive. Can't remember, there was a thread I was going to mention and now I've forgotten. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Emma?
Absolutely, it makes sense, yeah. And so, so psychic hygiene for me as well is just like my kind of one of the main messages that I teach as well, is like, how do we manage and maintain clarity of our energy field so that we can receive our intuition and our communications with the spirit realm clearly and cleanly without interference or kind of blockages of things in our energy field. And so, I mean, being in nature a lot anyway naturally cleanses your energy field, doesn't it? Just sit under a tree and ask it to cleanse your energy field and it will. So, how do you build that in, that kind of aspect of, and what do you like to share about the psychic hygiene?
Well, firstly, this was the point I was trying to make earlier on, is that it's to recognize that, yes, this work can be energetically risky. So my job as a practitioner and as a teacher or facilitator is to mitigate those risks. So the first thing is to start on a physical level to make sure that my body's healthy. If I feel overly tired, if I feel dehydrated, hungry, ill, distracted, I'm not going to go into a consultation for another client. I'm not going to tune into one for myself. I'm certainly not going to do an energetic clearing. It's the same like if you're going to perform surgery, you want to make sure that you are clear-headed. Okay, so you want to be physically well rested, not disturbed. Ideally, your cell phone's off, for example, to make sure that you're not going to be disturbed, but also not affected by too much electromagnetic radiation, because the nervous system is an electrical system. So like any electrical system, it'll have an electromagnetic field and it will be affected by other electromagnetic fields. So on a physical level, that. On an emotional level, making sure that I'm also, got my equilibrium with my emotions, making sure that I'm dealing with the stuff that comes up. It's like what is known in the sort of New Age spiritual world as living it. Like if the issues arise, what I'm dealing with my own trauma and drama in my life, you deal with that. And you make sure that you're not doing the spiritual bypassing thing of just love and light, thoughts and prayers. No. Go and rummage around in the shadow world if you need to make sure that you know what aspects of yourself need integrating and become the tools in your own magic and your own nature communication practice. On a mental level, knowing what my skills are, what my boundaries are. Boundaries being, sure, I'm setting up a container. I know what I'm capable of. If I don't know something, I make that clear. If I don't feel like I can take on a job from a particular client, I refer them. I'm not going to exceed my capacity, because that's also when it becomes dangerous. And it doesn't mean I never push my boundary, but what it means is that I'm never going to be taking a greater risk than what I believe is safe for me to do, and also is appropriate to be charging money for a client, from a client to be able to do. On a spiritual level, keep evolving spiritually, keep making sure that, again, this has to do with the emotional and the mental stuff. Make sure that I know what my boundaries are. Where are my trigger points? Because this is something that is reinforced in Emma's work, is that those internal wounds in your inner landscape, those become the entry points for certain harmful energies or entities to come in, make space, and to interfere and intervene with your communication process. And they hack your conversation. So you want to make sure that you have a clear channel of communication. And I also just want to mention that this work for me is not channeling. It's not mediumship. It's akin to it. It kind of sits parallel to it. But it's different in that, for me, you're retaining your sovereignty. At best, I'm just a live translator on a call between an aspect of nature, whether it's somebody's animal, their landscape, their body, their ancestor, the spirit of the organization for their business, their farm, and the client. So I'm just being that live translator. So I have to make sure that I can listen and relay the information, convey that as clearly as possible. And it's never going to be 100%, in my opinion. I don't think that any human can claim that they do that 100%, but to the best of our ability. And this is where practice comes in. So starting with one tree or a species of tree, rather than saying, cool, I'm a beginner, now I'm going to work with like people's ancestors and their landscapes. It's like, start basic and then work your way up. It's like any skill. You can go to the gym and you go and you pump iron. You're not going to see biceps the very next day. That takes time.
Yeah, and the benefit of, the other great benefit actually of maintaining the cleanliness of your energy field and integrating those shadow aspects is that you just naturally cleanse and clear your doors of perception. And so you just naturally become more psychic, you naturally become more sensitive and able to perceive the subtle realms easier anyway. So it's just, it goes hand in hand. The psychic hygiene aspect just goes hand in hand with this kind of work, doesn't it? So, but yeah, and so for me, I specialize in plant, communicating with the plant spirits. That's my kind of thing. But for you, you're much more broad ranging with nature communication, and so I know that you do communicating with aspects of people's bodies for health issues. So can you give us some examples of how that works, and maybe a case study?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I can definitely share about that. So a lot of that work does fall within the energetic clearing work, but sometimes I'll have consultations with people. And one of my favorite case studies is a 12-year-old girl in New Zealand. Well, last year she was 12. In New Zealand, whose mother reached out to me because she was due to have surgery 2 months after the consultation. And she had very severe scoliosis in her upper and her lower spine, so 2 curves and rotations. And the mother felt like there was something wrong. She just didn't want her daughter to have surgery if it wasn't absolutely necessary. And she wanted to see if there was another approach that could be done. And so in the consultation, she said, what do you see? And I could see that there was interference in her field. And this speaks to the energetic safety and psychic hygiene aspect. And just to say, every single one of us has stuff in our field. It's like plaque building up on your teeth. You brush it every single day, it's still going to build up because that's just part of being alive. But if you're not aware of this, and we carry stuff over from other lifetimes, and we inherit things from our families, and through our own lifetimes, we experience things. And so this little girl had something in her field that needed to be cleared, that I could see was mostly ancestral based, as well as a little bit of other life stuff. So I said to her, look, this is what I'm seeing. It doesn't feel appropriate to try and address this in a consultation. I would recommend having a clearing. But I said to her, the only time I could do the clearing would be the next week, or I would refer her to Emma or any other colleague that I feel would be able to do this kind of work. So she said, nope, book her in, we'll do the clearing. 2 weeks after that clearing, she had another scan that was just going to be soon before the surgery. And the mother said that she was so surprised that not only had the scoliosis stopped, but it had started reversing. And this was me doing communication with her spirit team, with my spirit team. This was at a distance, so it was remote for anybody who's not familiar with the idea of an energetic clearing. I'm sitting here in South Africa doing this work on this little girl's energy field, not live over a Zoom call, completely offline, remote. And I send a written report and then have a follow-up call. And she wasn't even fully aware. Like, the mother got the written report. She didn't tell the daughter everything that had happened because it didn't feel appropriate for the mother. So what was so fascinating is that, again, I'm not doing the energetic clearing work. I am basically orchestrating, creating a container and allowing nature to do the healing. That's why I don't call myself the healer, because I am the facilitator and allowing that the little girl gets the help that she needs from nature to remove the blocks for her own healing to come into play. So she's making herself whole, but sometimes we just aren't aware of the blocks to that becoming whole.
But were you communicating with something specific within her condition?
Yeah. So I was communicating with the body, with the spine, with her ancestors, with my spirit team. And so that was one example. Another example was a client I had recently whose microbiome, he wanted me to communicate with the microbiome in his gut because he is very EMF sensitive to the point of, like, it really affects his life. And this was a consultation in person because that's what he requested, and that was in Cape Town. And
sorry, can you just define EMF sensitive?
Oh, sorry. So sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies. So he would get headaches, he would feel nausea, he would get extreme fatigue from it. He might even break out in hives on his body. And more people are starting to realize that many of their physical symptoms are as a result of this. And that's just because of the increased amount of radiation that we face, which we're not used to on an evolutionary level. So I was communicating with his microbiome. But what was so fascinating was that the microbiome was saying that the EMF sensitivity was not just about the physical aspects of his field. It had to do with his worldview. So he had to completely change his view of reality. And that had to do with a number of things, which I can't go into detail for, potentially revealing who he is. But it was fascinating to have this wisdom. And there was stuff that there was nowhere I could have ever thought of myself from these microbes, but they were the ones who were saying, we are a part of you. When you communicate with us, you are meeting parts of yourself that you didn't know you had, but you're also meeting parts of us that we can integrate more, because we have 10 times the number of at least bacterial cells, but certainly more fungi and yeasts and protists and viruses and so on in our bodies than human cells. So they hold an entire consciousness, and we are not just human, we are entire ecosystems. So communicating with his microbiome and with his digestive system meant that they were the ones who started doing the healing on his body, because he was allowing it within the container of a consultation, and he didn't know how to do this himself. He immediately felt that there were certain energy flows in his feet that had started unblocking, in his torso, especially in his abdomen and in his head. So he started feeling a lot better immediately after the consultation. And then,
okay. So how does that actually work then, that you're communicating with a microbiome? Are you negotiating with it? Are you kind of encouraging it to come back to balance?
What is fascinating is that you're communicating not with a single microbe or even one species, although one can, because it's a biome, it's an ecosystem. There's a whole internal landscape. When you're communicating with it, you're communicating with like a community of different species consciousness. And this is where it becomes interesting. You can communicate with different levels in nature. One can communicate with one cow, for example, or a herd of cows, or the whole of cow consciousness on this earth, or just within a particular region or country. And what I was doing was communicating with the microbes that live in and on his body, but especially with the ones who live in his digestive tract. So that's all the way from mouth to anus, But then, of course, those microbes are going to be quite similar across the rest of our body as well sometimes. And those are the ones I was addressing. And communication with microbes feels very different. So they experience the world with, not with the same kinds of physical senses because they have a different physical makeup. But it will feel almost like waves. It will feel like colors sometimes. It's a different kind of experience. And because of that, it's sometimes difficult to translate the information as accurately as if I were doing it with an animal, which is easier for me and for other humans to relate to. So it comes across like any aspect of communication with nature. It'll come across like in my inner vision. It'll come across as thoughts, feelings, emotions, just an immediate knowing, intuition. That's generally how for me, the mechanism will come through, the method of communication. But what he was experiencing it was slightly different. So his mode of communication is more through maybe dream work. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's really about opening our field, if you like, to all of our senses so that we can communicate and perceive in kind of different ways to what we're used to, just allowing communications to come in that might just be through felt sensation or through kind of memories or through dreams, like you say. So yeah, it's really about kind of opening and kind of relaxing our kind of like focus, because all of our senses are very specialized, aren't they? They're very kind of like, eye consciousness is very specific, but even when it comes to communicating with plants, they don't perceive in the same way as us either. So they perceive in this kind of like gestalt of like everything all at once. And so they kind of create this big picture. So when I'm taking people through that experience of learning plant communication, an exercise of becoming the plant early on is a really good exercise to get people to understand how plants perceive. And so understanding how all these different aspects of nature themselves perceive can really help us to just kind of like open ourselves up to different ways of communication and allowing those messages to come through in lots of different ways.
It reminds me a little bit of what you were saying earlier on of, oh gosh, it's not on the tip of my tongue, of coming home. I remember sitting in this huge grandmother beech tree and not doing very much, but opening up my field, allowing my nervous system to relax, which is a big part of it. People are like, how do you open your field? It's breathing deeply. It's allowing that your nervous system relaxes, a feeling of openness, relaxing your belly so you're not tensing there, relaxing even your pelvic floor, relaxing your jaw. And the more relaxed we are, the less we have to do, the more we can just be. And the feeling of being with this beech tree was one of feeling like my whole body was going to physically explode with the amount of love that I felt. I felt like my physical body couldn't contain. I felt like I was radioactive with love. And that's something that one can experience. And that's that feeling of being at home. Is like, I've never felt that from another single human being or group of human beings. But this is the power, the wisdom, the intelligence, the magic, the love of nature that we have access to if we allow it. But it can take some time because it's our own barriers to love that we're working with. And so this kind of work, like what happened with this one client with the microbes, was fascinating because it was showing something that he had explored a lot of stuff, a lot of kinds of therapies and healings and journeys and workshops and courses and all kinds of stuff, plant medicine. He'd worked with iboga, but nothing had ever shown him directly the fact that at the core of his understanding of reality was this feeling of being at war. It's always us versus them. So his shields were so strong on subconscious levels that that's what made him feel like he's constantly having to be resistant to life. And that, of course, is going to make one feel brittle almost, and what would make your resilience, your capacity to be in homeostasis with the even electromagnetic fields, it's going to be lower. So this is where not just our physical immune system, but our energetic immune system becomes really important to look after. And in this work, working with other aspects of nature, like microbes, with the body parts, it taps into deeper wisdom and knowledge of nature that we don't have access to with our everyday logical minds. It means that we can start to understand what are the core reasons for certain health issues. And I'm not saying that I'm perfectly healthy. That's like a journey in itself. But it allows us insight. And with insight comes understanding. And then we can start to soften and break down the scar tissue of the wounds that we carry in our energy field. And then this becomes practical skills for co-creation of our future with nature, in our healing. It allows us to evolve in a way that's not just beneficial for us, but is beneficial for other species. Our microbiome live with us and on us and in us, and they help to keep us alive, but it's also in their interest to do that. So for us to communicate with them allows us to figure out what it is that they need from us, different foods we might need to be eating, different exercises we might need to be doing, certain things that stimulate their well-being and therefore stimulate our well-being. And the same is going to be true with our ecosystem, with, for example, the house that we live in. And this is also where communicating with invisible nature becomes fascinating, because I had a client today who had done a land clearing for last year, and she wanted a follow-up call and consultation. In this follow-up consultation, I was able to see that the work she is doing with her own energetic well-being has increased the whole house's and the whole piece of land's well-being. She has these huge crystals in her garden and in her house, and they were just zinging with vitality. And so all of life, all the other little creatures that were living in her house that, she wasn't even aware of, and the birds in the garden even, they were all very happy. And so when we're communicating in this way, we can increase the vitality of entire ecosystems. It's not just a selfish thing of asking nature to heal us for our own sake. It allows that the rest of nature gets to evolve as well. And her being well meant that the whole system was better. And the work she was doing on herself became like a mirror image in the house, like the house being a fractal picture of what her own health was like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this work just shows us the interconnectedness of everything, of all of nature, and how you kind of even doing those house clearings and balancing the energies of houses and looking for the underwater streams and the kind of the misaligned energies, or the trapped entities, or the earthbound spirits, and just bringing balance to everything in the home can then bring balance to the human in reverse as well. And it's just, yeah, I mean, I've seen that so many times, where people can't sleep, or and they've or getting sick all the time, and they've just got some kind of like some kind of toxic energy running through their bedroom, and a toxic energy line, which can easily be cleansed and perhaps moved, or whatever needs to happen. But yeah, communicating with the Davic spirit of our house where we live is really important. Communicating and having a relationship with the Davic spirit of our business is really important, and this is how we maintain balance, because nature always just wants to naturally come back to balance, and we are nature. And so we just want to find, like, how do we bring balance? How do we allow and help everybody who lives in, upon, or around me to just have this a beautiful and enjoyable existence? Rather than having to struggle or having to deal with things all the time. And so if we expand our awareness to balance, not just of our bodies and perhaps the relationships with our immediate family members, but to the relationship to our house, the relationship to our garden, the relationship to our community and our neighbors, there's a whole ecosystems within ecosystems. And yeah, it can get complex, but if you start with just kind of keeping your house energetically clean and balanced, it can really help, with you, even psychologically. So, yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it becomes very interesting when looking at how it can be very practical. Like, for example, with this client today, the spirit of the deva of her house wanted to tell me where she had had renovation work done and had addressed certain damp issues, but there were certain things that the builders had missed or the renovators had missed. And so there was still ingress of water along one of the walls, and that's not something that she was aware of. So this gives us almost like laser aspect vision into aspects that on a practical level, insights that we would not have known otherwise. And that could be for health issues. It could be for growing a garden, building your home, growing your business, finding deeper harmony in a relationship, any aspect of nature, any part of our lives. This is where nature communication comes into being. And so the main thing that I want to share in this particular talk is that all of nature, literally all of nature and all of existence, it's possible to communicate with it. And the limit is our imagination. And so starting on a very basic level, and avoid getting overwhelmed, but knowing that it is possible, and that's exciting and it's magical, it's important that we do, and starting basically and then working our way up to it. I don't think I'm going to get to the end of my life and be like, cool, nature communication, I've got that down. That's not going to happen. But to start somewhere is better than nothing. I'd rather get to the end of my life and be like, cool, that was a chunk that I managed to get, than to never do it. Because I don't think we've even touched the surface with microbial communication, with extraterrestrial communication, all of that kind of thing. Yeah.
Or mushrooms.
Yes. Yeah.
I like communicating with mushrooms. How about you?
Yeah. I'll be honest, I love communicating with mushrooms, but mushrooms, unless it's like with you on a beach, then I found that they can, if I'm on my own or it's nighttime, it's going to be shadow world exploration. It's going to go deep and it's going to go to the uncomfortable places. So I have to buckle up and be like, cool, that's the roller coaster ride we're going on. But this is the beauty. People are often scared of experiencing what nature communication brings up for them. They worry that they're going to be taking on what nature feels as their own. You know, the pain and the sorrow and the suffering and the grief in nature is going to become their own. It's like, actually, what this work invites is first to deal with what is yours and to tease apart what you're projecting onto nature and finding out actually so much of it is ours and not all of it that we feel in our own bodies is what we have generated in our own lives. Often it's carried over from other lifetimes, from ancestral stuff, picked up in morphogenetic fields, from populations that we live in, a country that we live in, a school, a religion that we're part of. So it invites a shedding of those layers towards more joy, more harmony, more peace, more pleasure in our life. And that's actually at the base of it what I've learned nature wants from us. Nature does not mind, in my experience, that we kill and eat animals, for example. It's how we raise them. It's how we kill them. It's how we treat their bodies afterwards, because the same is going to be true for plants. Plants also have consciousness. It doesn't mind that we have boundaries. It's how we hold those boundaries. So it's all about this learning of coming back to what you said at the beginning, Emma, of what is right relationship and how do we navigate that with love, while also breaking down our perception of what we think of as right relationship. All the dogma that comes with it.
Yeah, and so how, obviously there's an appropriateness that comes into this, like what is appropriate to actually discuss or ask of the invisible? You know, how do you kind of, where are the boundaries within that for you? What's appropriate to kind of ask of these beings that live in the spirit realms?
That's a very good question. That's not one I get asked very often, and I really like that because it's one I've asked myself many times. It's how I've programmed my work with this question, actually, is because you have access to all the wisdom and intelligence of nature through nature communication. As you start to open up, you're like, whoa, everything, you can know everything. But what is appropriate for me boils down to what is practically helpful. What helps now? Those are the three words that every single one of my consultations, what helps now? So in my work, for example, I will never know in a client's consultation or an energetic clearing something that they are not ready to address in their own lives, or that they wouldn't want me to know about, regardless of confidentiality, which is obviously a big thing in my work. But if they don't want me to know about it in the first place, I won't know about it. If it's not going to be practically relevant to their life right now, to improve their quality of life, to address an issue that they're bringing to the table, it's not going to be something that I delve into. That information won't even be revealed. But also, what is practically helpful to the rest of life on this planet right now? There are many people who are delving just out of curiosity to find out what's going on other planets. Okay, and in other realms. Cool, you do you. I'm not going to go there because it's one of those things. Like one of my friends who's a colleague, whose name is also actually I won't say, she found that like many clients just want to like fuck around and find out in those realms. And it's like, you can, excuse my language, but you can do that. But that's what also gets you into trouble. Know what you're getting into, and just going there for the sake of it is what can untether you from grounded reality, from staying in your body, from staying right here, right now, and thinking that you are now a fifth dimensional, 12th dimensional starseed being. And sure, there might be some of us around. I've not yet met somebody who's doing that, because if you still have a body, if you still eat food and you drink water and you need to sleep and you get grumpy, you are still human. So what is going to help you be better at being a human in this lifetime while having your spirit animating this body? What is going to help you in your relationships with the rest of life, whether it's human, more than human? How is it going to make the journey of repair, which is part of what I believe this journey of being human on this life is about, easier? How do we become better at loving and also being loved? What are the barriers to that experience that we can start to dissolve through this work so that we find harmony, joy, pleasure, peace, all of these things, so that we can dance, so that we can sing, so that we can make art, so that we can make love, so that we can experience the beauty of a sunset or a sunrise, beautiful food, being in the body. And I can rabbit on about all of this, but I hope that that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that most issues with my clients just boil back down to a lack of self-love or a lack of self-worth. You know, so we have quite big blockages, like cultural blockages around this, you know, so the way our society brings us up, you know, and that we're raised is creating a lot of these blockages. So it takes time, but also, like you said, people can get carried away a little bit as well when they start to kind of have psychic experiences and communicational experiences. And one thing that I always kind of instill in people is that, you know, if you are intruding on anyone's own space or influencing them, anyone, even the unseen beings, without their permission, it could be a living being or an incarnate being or a discarnate being. If you're influencing without their permission and without agreement from them, then that's really kind of, you're going to be accruing some kind of quite a bit of negative karma. And then it will come back to you anyway. Things get reflected back to you, usually in a worse way. So we have to be really grounded in our ethics and understanding of what appropriate is. Yeah.
One of my dear friends has said that with every step that we make in our spiritual evolution and our capacity of, for example, psychic ability, we have to take 3 steps in our moral code and our ethics. And I like that because I find that with my work, maybe it's just inbuilt into my own understanding and worldview of what nature communication can be. But I found that nature can see through your stuff, your agenda, much more clearly than a human can. So it's going to be actually quite difficult if you're keeping it to conversation level, including magic and ritual and ceremony. If you boil it down to conversation, automatically there's built in this respect of the other, this equality with the other. Not same, we're not same, but we can be equal. We can treat each other with the same reverence. And so in doing nature communication like that, it's impossible to actually start to interfere with somebody else's free will and agency because you can't. And also nature will see through you much more easily than a human. So yeah, I mean, it's like, it is magic, but it's always going to be on the erring on the side of magic that is supportive of harmony, of supportive of real universal love.
Yeah. Do you have any other area that you were wanting to share with people for this
I would say probably the inner landscape in terms of the parts of ourself that are not the microbe, but the body and the archetypes that exist within us. And I don't have a clear map for myself of what that looks like, but I invite people to start thinking of themselves and remembering that they are nature. We are humans, and so therefore we are also nature. And that is the first port of call when it comes to nature communication. This is part of the work with our own personal development in this. And this is part of psychic hygiene, energetic safety. And we do hammer that in quite a bit, but it's so important because the more we are treating, like you were saying, ourselves with as much love as possible, gentleness, kindness, the more we are pulling ourselves back together, we're pulling ourselves into wholeness, the less active healing we have to go out and seek and outsource and push very hard at. So treating, even if you want to cast an archetype of yourself as a deer instead of as a part of humanness, then do that. Let that become the internal landscape that you garden, that you build a landscape with, because that is also nature communication. And I would argue it's the most important aspect of nature communication as part of the healing process of being human in this world. And with that comes a huge number of synchronicities, of miraculous healing experiences that we can have. And that also makes then a lot more time available for us to be doing the fun things in life rather than having to push very hard at I'm doing the inner work. It doesn't always have to be inner work. It can also be fun.
Absolutely. For sure. Inner play, not
Inner play. Yes, I like that. Yes.
So, okay, thank you. I mean, this what we're talking about is so vast. Like we're just touching into different areas, and you can speak about this for a whole weekend, and still not really get to the bottom of what we're talking about. But we just wanted to kind of open this discussion to kind of, bring some normalcy to the communication and with all aspects of nature, and just take us back to that way of being that is just more connected and more in alignment with the unseen realm. And so thank you for sharing all of that, those insights and opening those doors for us. It has been an enlightening hour, and thank you for sharing all your insights and wisdom. It's really appreciated. And thank you for everybody for joining us today. And if you would like to join me for future conversations around the realms of healing, shamanism, plant spirit healing, and esoteric wisdom, then do sign up to my newsletter at naturalesoterics.org. And I hope you can join me for future webinars and conversations, online classes. I do lots of these things, and thank you for your time and for joining us. So thanks again, Saskia.